Please welcome Paul Davis.
Thank you. The first time I visited Grand Canyon was in 2007. Made a trip to the South Rim, and like everyone else, I was awed by the grandeur and the beauty of the spectacular sight I was looking at. Several years later, I had the opportunity to visit the North Rim. And while I was at the North Rim, I appreciated the North Rim for its different style, for the laid-back atmosphere. I really liked the North Rim. But while I was there, I attended a ranger program about the development of Bright Angel Point at the North Rim. And in that program, the ranger mentioned the Grand Canyon Lodge and said the lodge was built twice. It was built, it was destroyed by fire, and it was rebuilt again, and went on with his program. And I thought, boy, there's a lot of ground covered in that statement there about this lodge. And it got me real interested in doing some research on the lodge. Fortunately, about 4 years ago, the opportunity to volunteer at the North Rim came up. And my wife and I jumped at that opportunity, and for the last 3 years, we've spent a portion of our summer at the North Rim, enjoying its beauty and helping other people, the visitors, enjoy their visit to the portion of the park that we love so much. So, to get started, in the early morning hours of September 1st, I got to learn to use this. In the early morning hours of September 1, 1932, fire destroyed the 4-year-old Grand Canyon Lodge at Bright Angel Point on the North Rim. The fire started in the lower west portion of the building at about 3:30 a.m. and quickly spread throughout the entire structure. By mid-morning, when the fire was finally extinguished, it became what many consider to be the largest structure fire in the history of Grand Canyon National Park. The exact cause was never determined, but fortunately there was no loss of life. In addition to the lodge, there were 2 cabins that were also lost in the fire that were never rebuilt. The lodge was eventually rebuilt in the configuration that we see today, but construction did not start until 1936. Both the building and rebuilding of the lodge presented extraordinary challenges to the men and women who spent 2 cold winters in a remote location to bring these 2 unique structures into being. In the mid-1920s, saw the young Park Service establishing relationships with commercial enterprises to provide accommodations for park visitors. And the officers of the Union Pacific Railroad were eager to take part in that sort of arrangement. In 1923, the railroad formed the Utah Parks Company as a subsidiary to work with Park Service to design, build, and manage lodges at several national parks. Grand Canyon National Park contracted with the company in June of 1927 to develop facilities on the North Rim. The plan included the construction of a lodge and cabins at Bright Angel Point for visitor accommodation. At the same time, the Utah Parks Company bought the assets of the Wiley Way tourist camp that had operated at the North Rim under the ownership of Elizabeth and Thomas McKee since 1917. And it had grown to include 54 cabins surrounding a large main dining and entertainment pavilion and kitchen. The original lodge was the last in a group of 4 built by Utah Parks Company and designed by architect Gilbert Stanley Underwood in the rustic style desired by the Park Service. Underwood, because of the topography, Underwood was able to place the lodge right at the very edge of the rim, with a dining room and recreation room overlooking the canyon, a spacious lounge or sunroom with several oversized windows projected toward the canyon. Open terraces flanked the lounge to the east and the west. A second floor in this structure provided space for a women's dormitory and an apartment for the lodge manager, and I assume his wife was the chaperone of the women's dorm. I don't know that for sure, that's my assumption. Steps ascending from the east terrace led to an overlook on top of the lounge, and there was a 3rd and 4th level above the tower in a tower above the lobby that offered 2 additional observation points. The design of the lodge and cabins made extensive use of natural material, which enhanced the natural and rustic look of the structures, but also provided economic benefits and reduced transportation costs. Ponderosa pine came from the adjacent Kaibab National Forest. That provided the structural and exterior lumber for the building, and a quarry established about 2 miles north of the site supplied the building stone. Not only did the lodge and cabins have to be designed and built, but a pump house and hydroelectric plant were required 3,800 feet below the rim in Roaring Springs with a water pipeline and electrical lines extending up to the rim. The isolation of the North Rim at this time particularly cannot be overemphasized, nor can the obstacles facing the crews that in 1927. Access was only from the north, and Kanab, Utah, the only town of size in the area, was 80 miles away. The closest rail line was an additional 120 miles beyond that. And at 8,200 feet above sea level, winter snowfall frequently accumulated to depths of 5-6 feet and with much higher drifts. The rough dirt path to Bright Angel Point, it was barely adequate for the automobiles of the day that would make it to the Wiley Way camp in the summer, and it was a significant challenge for the heavy construction vehicles that were hauling material into the construction site. As you see in this picture, if one vehicle encountered difficulties, traffic stopped until the problem was resolved. During the periods of heaviest snowfall, a crew of men operating a rotary snowplow kept the road reasonably clear. To ensure that the plow followed the correct path through the deep snow, tall poles with cross arms extended to the center of the roadway, and they provided guidance to the operator. Whatever. You can see the pole there with the, yeah. There, oh, aim at the ceiling, you get the ceiling. Yeah, that was in the center of the roadway, so they could see where they were going. An additional, you can't see it in this picture, but the rotary snowplow was relatively light, and so they had to get a World War I surplus Army tank to push the plow. You can't see it, it's obscured by the snow in that picture. In the springtime, there were other challenges. The road, this picture was taken in the area of DeMont Park, about 18 miles north of the lodge. And in the springtime, it became very muddy. And for a portion of the spring, they were able to make their truck movements at night. They would, when the ground was frozen, to avoid the worst of the muck and mire. But it eventually got the best of them. And in April, it became totally impassable. And toward the end of the month, construction actually ground to a halt for lack of some materials. They were entirely out of cement and getting dangerously low on other items. And to deliver some essential supplies temporarily, they trucked in horses from Kanab and made light wagon loads, carrying light loads around the quagmire until they got things squared away. Water at Bright Angel Point in 1927 came from a series of several springs below the rim in the Transept Canyon. While adequate for the use prior to 1927, it didn't provide enough flow for the anticipated crowds that were going to come to the new lodge complex. So concurrent with construction of the lodge, a new pump house and hydroelectric plant took shape in the depths of Roaring Springs Canyon. The pump house was constructed near the spring outlet, but the powerhouse that you see here needed to be well below that point in order to maximize the energy from the flowing water. And to get that flowing water from the spring to the powerhouse, they had to build a wood stave penstock, 26 inches in diameter, and that was about 3/4 of a mile long. Power lines followed the penstock back to the pump house and continued on up to the rim to supply power up there. And the 50 horsepower pumps that were installed there at the spring had to overcome static head pressure. The pressure required to get water up to the rim before you got any flow was 1,900 pounds per square inch. That's a pretty reasonable pressure of liquid. And when completed, this pumping and pipeline arrangement was the highest single-stage water lift in the world. Hauling machinery down to the pump house and powerhouse was a significant challenge to the builders. Luckily, Utah Parks Company was able to locate a disused tram at Bingham Canyon Copper Mine near Salt Lake City, and they got it for the cost of removal. So they installed the powerhouse and the head house in the vicinity of the current trailhead of the North Kaibab Trail. In fact, there's some remnants of cable and a piece of concrete slab that you can see not far from that where the trail starts that were remnants of this structure. But in addition to that, they had to construct 17 towers to support the 1-inch cable that went from the head house all the way down to the area of Roaring Spring. There was some real unique engineering involved there because some of them had to accommodate a curve in the direction that the cable was to take, and that made it difficult for the cars, or they called them Studebakers, that hung on the cable to get around. But this is one of those 17 towers. All the stone for construction at the rim came from a quarry about 2 miles north of the lodge site. And there was no sand or gravel available at the rim. So in order to produce the aggregate that they required for mixing mortar and cement and so forth, they had to crush the rock that they got from the mortar. In addition to that, another problem is that the rock was usually frozen. And if they put it into the crusher without thawing it, they would have problems and they would destroy the crusher. So they built placed a culvert. You can see it there in the picture. It's about 3-foot corrugated iron culvert, and they built fires in it and tended it 24 hours a day while the stone that they would place there around the culvert would thaw so they could go ahead and put it in the crusher, which I believe is that item right there. Handling the larger and frequently frozen pieces of stone posed an additional problem. There's a large fireplace on the east terrace of the lodge, and the architect was very specific about requiring that the lintel over that fireplace be one single piece of stone. The lintel is right there. Unfortunately, in February, when they were trying to put this stone in place, it broke apart, it fractured. And so to keep the project going, the masons fabricated a temporary lintel out of 3 pieces of stone so they could continue with their work, which they did, with the understanding from the architect that they would replace that with a single piece in the warmer weather. Work proceeded, spring came and went, the lodge opened, and to this day, the 3-piece lintel is still in place. Despite these and other challenges encountered during construction, the completed lodge opened on June 5th, 1928, missing the scheduled opening date by a mere 4 days. A formal dedication on September 25th, 1928, hosted by Stephen Mather, National Park Service Director, and attended by many railroad officials and many dignitaries from Utah and Arizona, began what would be the 4-year life of the original lodge. After the 1932 fire, the Utah Parks Company received considerable pressure to quickly rebuild the lodge. The director of the National Park Service contacted the Union Pacific president expressing hope that the work would begin pretty quick at once. There was also a letter from the president of the Mormon Church requesting that they rebuild the lodge as quick as possible. Union Pacific, however, declined to immediately rebuild the lodge, citing poor economic conditions and declining numbers of visitors. Now, you have to remember this was in the middle of the Great Depression, and so it's not hard to understand why Union Pacific didn't want to make a large capital investment at that time. They did, however, construct a temporary building north of the lodge to use as a temporary reception hall for the visitors. Debris from the fire, pardon me. Well, that's a completed lodge. Debris from the fire was removed but intact stone pillars, walls, and abutments remained with the intent of incorporating them into the new structure. In 1935, Utah Parks Company enlisted Union Pacific architect W.T. Wellman to design the new project. Wellman submitted plans to the park, which received prompt approval, but concerned over fire suppression, Superintendent Minor Tillison specifically requested review by a Park Service fire control expert in Washington, D.C., who did approve the plans. Specifications also indicated that existing stone walls and foundations would be reused. Upon park approval, Union Pacific issued a request for quotes in 1936, and Ryberg Brothers, a construction firm in Salt Lake City, presented the winning bid for about $100,000. Construction of the lodge commenced in the fall of 1936 and presented fewer challenges than 1928. The project required reconstruction of a single building. No foundation work was involved, and it was anticipated that a significant amount of the existing stone would be reused in the new structure. Electric power and water were obviously available, and no work was required below the rim. And hauling material to Bright Angel Point was a lot easier because Route 67 had been established by the Highway Department, and it was much easier to get to the Bright Angel Point. When construction began, the contractor discovered some problems with the stonework. When workers attempted to repoint the existing stone, it would spall or break apart. It became apparent that nearly all stonework had to be torn down and rebuilt using considerable new quarried stone, although some pieces were salvaged for reuse. Adding to the difficulties for the contractor, the area stipulated by the park for trees had a lot of inferior trees, and they had to look over a wider area to get their lumber. So the cost of the contract increased by about $35,000. By early November, the lodge structural work was neared completion, and interior work had begun. Essentially, all material was on site. However, by mid-November, the construction manager reported that snow, cold weather, and men going to vote had delayed progress. Working diligently throughout the rest of the year, construction got back on schedule, but snow became a significant problem. The first of the year saw the road from Jacob Lake become totally impassable due to snow drifts on the order of 12 feet high. With the exterior essentially complete, the remaining workmen could continue with interior finish work, but the blocked road prohibited delivery of food to the workforce. By February, the food shortage had become acute, and concern for the workers grew, and evacuation planning began. A Highway Department dispatched a rotary snowplow from Flagstaff. It broke down on the way, and the second one was dispatched. But eventually, the men 19 men that were working for Ryberg had to hike to Phantom Ranch and made it to the South Rim on mules. And a tractor pulling a sled transported 10 men and 3 women from DeMont Park northward across the snow to Jacob Lake. Despite these setbacks, the lodge opened on June 1st, 1937. Now, the new lodge bears some resemblance to the original. Since the foundation remained intact and unharmed by the fire, it could be reused without alteration. This allowed the ground level floor to remain essentially identical in both structures. The east and west terraces were retained, as were the lounge, restaurant, and recreation room. The similarities end there, however. Notably, the central tower was eliminated in the newer version, taking away 3 overlooks, as well as the second level dormitory and apartment. Another obvious difference is the roof slope. The original lodge was about a 40-degree slope, and the new one was about 20. This strengthened the structure and allowed more effective snow shedding, but significantly altered the appearance of the lodge. The new design incorporated much less wood in the exterior walls, possibly over concern for flammability. Now, there are 2 very significant differences that are not noticeable without close inspection. Probably both were also out of concern over fire. Peeled ponderosa logs formed almost all of the structural material in the original lodge, and the new design incorporated steel beams and trusses instead of wood. And where exposed, these were encased in peeled ponderosa logs to represent the appearance similar to the original. Also, an independent fire protection water line came to the lodge from the storage tanks to the north. A new high-pressure pump that assured adequate flow supplied water to this pipe. Fire suppression in the original building depended on normal low-pressure domestic water lines that had become damaged early in the fire and were of little help. The second lodge has survived to the present time, and it's more substantial and utilitarian in design and has functioned well with very few modifications over the years. The building it replaced, while a superb example of rustic park architecture, had some design flaws that became apparent on that fateful fiery morning in 1932. Both satisfied the needs of the park to blend with the environment while providing visitors with comfortable accommodations and splendid views of the canyon. The story of their construction remains unique in park history. Thank you.